Welcome to the Investors Trading Academy talking glossary of financial terms and events. Our word of the day is OPEC. The organisation of the petroleum exporting countries, called OPEC, was created in 1960 to unify and protect the interests of oil-producing countries. The original members included Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. OPEC has since expanded to include 7 more countries: Algeria, Angola, Indonesia, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar and United Arab Emirates, making a total membership of 12. OPEC represents a considerable political and economic force. 2/3 of the oil reserves in the world belong to its members. First display of the power that OPEC could have on the world's politics was in the 1970s, when the Yom Kippur War exploded in the Middle East. The United States assisted Israel in defending itself against the Egyptian and Syrian armies. In what may have been a response to this interference in the war, OPEC instituted an oil embargo that targeted the United States and its European allies. The embargo lasted from the 19th of October 1973 to the 17th of March 1974. The effects of the OPEC oil embargo were widespread. Immediate effects included inflation and economic recession in the United States and other countries targeted by the embargo.
Once in office, Carter focused most of his time on the worldwide energy crisis. Carter used his fireside chats as a platform to encourage the American people to conserve oil and gas. In addition to this, he presented Congress with over 100 proposals on energy conservation. Out of this battle, Congress approved the National Energy Act, which placed a higher tax on gas-guzzling automobiles, as well as removing price controls on oil and natural gas produced in the United States. The National Energy Act didn't do much, but it did slightly ease American dependence on foreign oil by 1979. Unfortunately, in the summer of 1979, renewed violence in the Middle East, combined with the decision of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, also known as OPEC, to announce another major price hike, caused the price of oil to skyrocket. During these oil shortages, it was common for cars to wait in lines around the block to get gas, and for gas stations to run out of gas. Cars were given stickers, and gas was rationed so that drivers would get gas on certain days of the week. This energy crisis crippled many Americans who couldn't afford these high gas prices.
The issue with energy, combined with other factors, caused the United States to fall into an economic crisis. With all the long gas lines and inflating energy costs, Americans became very aware of the Middle East. Due to all of the conflict in the region, Carter achieved one of his greatest accomplishments. In 1977, Carter was able to seize an opportunity to help negotiate a peace between Egypt and Israel, 2 nations of extremely different belief systems. Carter invited Anwar el-Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel to his retreat at Camp David. Over 12 days, Carter was able to mediate an agreement between the two. In the negotiations, Israel agreed to remove themselves from the Sinai Peninsula, which it had seized from Egypt in 1967, and Egypt agreed to recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation. The Camp David Accords would be one of the positive notes of Carter's presidency.
One of the biggest blemishes on Carter's record comes with the events that occurred in Iran. In the late 1970s, the Shah of Iran, or the leader of Iran that was placed into power by the CIA during the Eisenhower administration, was entrenched in political scandal, and the Iranian people were sick of the corruption and authoritarian tactics of the regime. Led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, the Shah was deposed, and Iran set up a religious state that followed the teachings of the Quran, or the sacred book of Islam. Despite this, the United States still supported the Shah, and when he fell ill, Carter allowed him to come to the United States for cancer treatment. As a method of protest, and in order to remove itself from the corrupt influence of the West, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American hostages. The students demanded that the United States send the Shah back to Iran to face criminal prosecution in exchange for the U.S. hostages. Carter refused to send the Shah back, and there was an intense standoff that lasted over a year. The hostages would finally be released on January 20th, 1981, shortly after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president. The Iranians intentionally held the hostages until Carter had left office to embarrass him, and as punishment for refusing to return the Shah to Iran.
In the early 1980s, the U.S. was still in a Cold War with Russia, and anti-communist sentiment was strong. During his presidential campaign, Reagan promised to assist anti-communist insurgencies around the world. For a brief time under Reagan, the CIA trained and assisted groups fighting communist leaders abroad. Reagan was particularly interested in a group called the Contras and their battle in Nicaragua. The Contras were a group battling the Cuban-backed Sandinistas, a communist group who had seized power in 1979. Reagan called the Contras the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. But much of the Contras' funding came from the cocaine trade. Because of this, Congress passed the Boland Amendment, specifically aimed at keeping American money from funding the group. That happened in 1982, shortly after Reagan took office. The amendment restricted the CIA and Department of Defense from using funds to provide military assistance to groups that were trying to overthrow Nicaragua's government, groups like the Contras. In 1985, an Iranian-backed terrorist group held 7 American hostages in Lebanon. Reagan insisted his advisors find a way to bring the hostages home, saying, "I want you to do whatever you have to do to help these people keep body and soul together." So, with permission from Reagan, McFarlane made a deal. The U.S. would give Iran weapons, and Iran would broker the release of the hostages. This happened even though Reagan publicly insisted he would not negotiate with terrorists, and despite the fact that there was a trade embargo with Iran. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The deal with Iran didn't just secretly secure the release of the hostages in exchange for weapons. There was money involved. While $30 million had been allocated for the weapons, the CIA funneled a portion of that money to the Contras in Nicaragua, the group Reagan supported in their guerrilla fight against the Sandinista government.